What's up, guys? Enkiri here, and you guys have been asking me for a Q&A video for a long time now, so I figured it was time to deliver, and I want to actually answer these questions in depth, in pretty good detail, so that the answers are actually helpful for the people who ask the questions. So I wasn't able to answer all of your questions here, but I'll make another installment in the next week or two, and I'll get some more of them and then more of the questions. And then if people enjoy this style of video, I'll keep going with it, and I'll do another installment maybe every month or every other month. But anyway, let's just jump right into the questions. All right, so first question, Armando Ruiz asks, what is the best way to know if you've been executing ramp-ups successfully? In my case, I still haven't had a week where the weight for my top set had to go down compared to the previous week. They either stall for a week or they go up while still leaving a rep in the tank for the top set. I'm worried that I have not been successfully following the just because you could lift a certain amount doesn't mean that you should lift a certain amount philosophy during my ramp-ups. So for the ramp-up protocols in my training templates, if there's still a rep in the tank on the top set, then you're doing just fine. You're certainly not overreaching or trying to take too much in any given session. It's when you have to get overly hyped up to complete a particular set, or if the last rep, whether it's a double or a triple or a set of 5 or whatever, if the last rep of the set is slow and grindy and really tough and you barely get through it, or you experience form breakdown or anything like that, then that's kind of when you're starting to move into just because you can doesn't mean you should type of territory. And it's when you start stringing several sessions like that together that you're going to start to stagnate and eventually regress. If you grind out a tough triple 3 or 4 weeks in a row, then you're probably going to, during that time period, you're probably going to accumulate enough fatigue that you'll need to deload at that point just to get back to baseline levels of performance again. Otherwise, then if you keep going, then you will risk regressing in your numbers. And it's important to remember that the ramp-up protocols that I have in my current programs, they're just auto-regulation. They're essentially a loose form of RPE. So if your goal is to ramp up to a heavy set of 5 for 3 consecutive weeks before tapering back down to triples, then a good way to play it in a scenario like that would be to strive for something like an RPE 8 for your top set in week 1, then maybe an RPE 9 for your top set in week 2, and then culminate it with an RPE 10 effort, an all-out effort in week 3. And then after that, you would stop doing the 5s and you would taper the reps down to triples instead. And so then you could start the next wave over by decreasing the RPE again and going through the process another time with the lower reps. But the triples will allow you to get to higher weights. But because we started by going back down, by dropping the RPE again, then that ensures that you don't end up overreaching. And this is how my late intermediate program is set up. And then the ultimate program that I have, the Ultimate Performance Manual, has a block that's set up similarly to that as well. But it sounds like you're on the right track, Armando. All right, next question. Jose Enriquez asks, what are some realistic intermediate standards for novice lifters? When should one consider switching to your intermediate program? And then he added an edit. What should we do if our upper body is intermediate and our lower body is still beginner stage, especially if there is a huge strength difference? I'm benching more than I squat. That's a good question. And I think the simplest measure of all here is always going to be the 1, 2, 3, 4 standard. That is a 1-plate overhead press or 135 pounds, a 2-plate or 225 pound bench press, 3-plate or 315 pound squat, and then a 4-plate or 405 pound deadlift. And that's a little bit of an oversimplification, and you'll almost definitely hit 1 or 2 of those standards before you hit the other ones, and you might even have one of them that lags behind all the others for a good while, but that's a nice and easy way, a nice and simple way to tell if you're just kind of on the right track in terms of the meat and potatoes strength work that you should be doing. Obviously, if you're super light in terms of body weight, then some of these numbers are going to be pretty hard to reach. And if you're starting off really heavy in terms of body weight, or you just have a really big frame, then some of them will probably be easier to reach. So you have to use common sense, but this is a good starting goal for most average-sized males, average-sized adult males, or whatever, to strive for. And if there's a huge discrepancy here between the upper body and the lower body, then to be honest, I probably wouldn't even really worry about it all that much. I would just keep putting in the work. And if you're squatting hard and training hard, and if you're training the squat hard how you should be, then eventually it is going to catch up and it will far surpass the bench press. That's simply an inevitability. And if it doesn't after maybe a year or two, then you should probably just reanalyze your effort levels in your lower body training, because you probably aren't actually squatting as hard as you think you are in a case like that. But I don't think that anyone in the early stages of training should be specializing regardless on any lifts. They shouldn't be specializing. You just should put in the work and let your natural strengths kind of sort themselves out, and then you specialize on certain lifts down the road once you have more experience. Next question, Dwayne Richard asks, what exercises would best substitute sprint/jump training in the winter when sprinting and jumping is not an option with all the snow? Well, if your goal is just general explosiveness, power, reactivity, all that kind of good stuff, then there are a few options here. You could do standing vertical jumps. Those can basically be done anywhere, even inside, as long as the room has a ceiling that's maybe 8 or 9 feet, or higher, depending on how tall you are and how high you can jump. You don't want to be hitting your head on the ceiling. And then you can also do vertical jumps. They can be done as single response or multi-response jumps. So you can do it where you're either stopping and resetting for each jump, or where you're stringing multiple jumps together in sequence, and that kind of changes the training effect a little bit. You can also incorporate weighted jumps to get an overload effect on the jumping pattern. If you have maybe 12 feet of space, 12 feet of horizontal space, maybe a little more than that might be needed depending on how far you can jump, but then you could do broad jumps where you're just jumping for distance instead, horizontal distance, and that kind of changes the training effect of the jump a little bit, makes it a little bit more hip dominant instead of knee dominant. Kneeling jumps are another good option that don't require any space at all. Those take the knees out of the equation entirely by having them lie on the ground, and it becomes purely an exercise in hip explosiveness. You can do those unloaded, or you can do them loaded as well. Beyond that, you can do low to intermediate level plyometric drills, and those don't require much space at all. They can be done indoors. All you really need for those is some low boxes, and those boxes can only really need to be a few inches high. If you do unilateral hops, you only need maybe 3 or 4 inches, maybe a little bit taller if you're a little bit more reactive than that. If you want to go bilateral, the boxes would have to be a little bit higher, but really not even that much, to be honest. And if you don't have boxes, then you can just hop around. You can hop around on one leg, you can hop around on 2 legs, you can switch legs, you can go from 1 leg to 2 legs, or 2 legs to 1 leg, jump off 2, land on 1 to overload the single leg efforts, that kind of thing. And those bounces and hops, they'll keep your lower legs nice and elastic. So that's a different kind of training effect, and it'll transfer over nicely into sprinting once you're able to start running again. And other than that, you just want to keep doing the meat and potatoes type power work that you should already be doing anyway. Things like high pulls and power cleans and push presses and heavy swings and all that good stuff. And keep doing it like that, and you'll be good to go once you're ready to get back outside and start running again. Next question, Luke Williams asks, do you think that most people leave the novice style linear progression after reaching a plateau for an intermediate program before they really finish off their linear gains? I've been lifting for a while now, and my lifts are in the intermediate range, but I've just recently started getting interested in powerlifting, and I started my first program, an intermediate program, and I'm progressing fine, but I'm considering going to a novice program for a while to see if I've really maxed out my ability to progress linearly, because even though my lifts were intermediate, I've never made strength the focus until I started that intermediate program. So I'm not totally convinced that I've really squeezed every drop of noob gains when it comes to powerlifting specifically. Would really appreciate hearing your thoughts on this. Thank you for making great videos. And yes, I do believe that most people leave this style of programming too soon. I think that linear progression in general, as well as linear periodization, have gotten a bad rap in recent years, really for no good reason whatsoever, and that has kind of steered people away from them who could otherwise still benefit from that style of programming. Personally, I still use linear progressions myself. I've been lifting for over 10 years now, and I still use them in my own training. I use them on many of my clients as well. I've got a guy right now who's threatening to bench press 400 pounds. He weighs about 200 pounds, a double body weight, pretty elite bench, and we've been using exclusively linearly periodized programming on his upper body work up to this point. I would wager that I could take pretty much any above average or even potentially elite lifter, depending on the situation, and program them linearly periodized work and have them make really good progress on it. The devil is just in the details, man. It's about how you set things up, what types of variations that you use, and when you rotate through them, how quickly that you progress and increase the weights on your key exercises, that kind of thing. And people think that they can just add 5 pounds to the bar every week for 16 weeks and then hit a PR at the end of the road of that, and it doesn't really work like that. And so then when it doesn't work, they blame the linear progression as being dumb and overly simplistic, when in reality they just didn't execute it properly. And so yes, I do think that most people give up this style of programming while leaving gains on the table, and that's just my 2 cents. Next question, and I apologize in advance if I get your name wrong here, but Michael Deschenez asks, what do you think about box squats as a way to develop explosiveness? How would you compare box squats to other exercises on the speed strength continuum? Well, box squats are a good way to build leg strength, a really good way to build leg strength, and they add an extra emphasis on RFD, or rate of force development, because they break up the eccentric concentric chain. So if you deload your weight completely onto the box like you're supposed to do, now you have to create concentric force without the aid of any eccentric assistance and the elastic energy that comes part and parcel with that. And emphasizing rate of force development is a really good thing for athletes, because RFD is typically the limiting factor in things like jumping and sprinting. So this exercise is complementary to the traditional explosive work that I typically talk about, power cleans and high pulls and swings and that kind of thing. But because of the nature of the force velocity curve, it doesn't replace the need for this aforementioned type of work from an athletic or general performance enhancing perspective. You still need those explosive movements to bridge that gap. You still have to be doing your cleans and your snatches and your high pulls and your loaded jumps and your resisted sprints and all that stuff. But the box squat is a great option here as part of the comprehensive program for athleticism. And then Michael continues with his question. He says, lastly, where do you put single leg work such as heavy ass split squats into this mix for optimal sports transfer? Now, I think that unilateral work has its place in this regard. I just don't think that it should be the meat and potatoes of the program. I don't think it should be the primary focus of the program, the primary work that you're doing. And I almost never program heavy, very heavy, or maximal unilateral work. When I program it, it's almost always light to moderate weights, with the exercise itself placed in a secondary or tertiary slot during the training session. But I think that the real magic from unilateral work occurs when you're using loads that bring you close to technical failure after 10 or 15 reps per leg. In my opinion, heavy, really heavy and near maximal unilateral work, it just doesn't really work well. The exercises are not, they don't lend themselves to that type of thing, to that type of stimulus, and they're not the same at that point. Once you start going too heavy, the mechanics change, and it really just turns into a bilateral split stance movement. So I recommend sticking with more moderate weights on these exercises. Next question, White Fang asks, do you believe you can possibly have even a slight chance of beating the legendary Gary on any lift? I have to say, if Gary was having a bad day and the sun was shining up my ass, then I might have a little bit of a chance, but it's really, really unlikely, because faceless trolls are well known for squatting a grand while weighing 400 pounds at 5% body fat ever since they were 2 years old. So Gary definitely has a huge advantage on me there. Next question, Charlie Broussard asks, is there a way to gain mass while increasing your speed, vertical, and or overall athleticism at the same time? Or are those two things counterproductive to each other? Now, it's certainly possible to do this, but it kind of depends on how much strength and mass that you've already gained. It kind of depends on what your training age is. If you're a complete noob or even an intermediate, then it's likely that you haven't gained all that much weight or strength relative to your baseline just yet, which means that any size gains that you put on can easily be outpaced with more than enough strength gains in order to increase your relative strength and allow you to actually move faster and more explosively in spite of being heavier. On the other hand, if you're advanced and you've already gained a bunch of weight and a bunch of strength, then it's less likely that any additional weight that you gain will be accompanied by enough strength to make it really make sense. If your power to weight ratio goes down, which is more and more likely to occur if you gain weight when you have a higher training age, then you will likely become slower. Now, if you need the size for the sake of needing the size, then sacrificing a small amount of speed might actually be worth it. But that would only apply to a small number of sports, things like American football or rugby. And in most other sports, that's not likely really going to be the case, and speed is going to be much more important than mass. All right, next question and last question for today. Pranjay Varshni asks, thoughts on training legs with lighter weights but higher reps, but still adding weight in the higher rep range. I've just recently recovered from a herniated disc injury, and the physio says to take it easy for a few months. I say that sounds perfectly fine to me, man. High rep leg work is an old school and known way to add large amounts of mass to the legs. I actually wrote about this last year in my 20 rep squats article. I tried out the 20 rep method for the first time in years, and I ended up adding, I think it was an inch to my thigh circumference in just about 8 weeks total, with one set of squats per week. And so it's a really good high rep leg work is a really good way to add leg mass fast. And if you're trying to keep spinal stress low, I would also recommend incorporating single leg work in a case like this. So Bulgarian split squats would be a good option. And one of my favorites is front rack split squats, where you elevate the front foot to add a couple inches to the range of motion. Goblet squats are another good way to get in high quality leg volume. While using an overall light weight, I like to knock those out just piston style, non-stop. Just hold the weight in that goblet position and just go until your legs can't take it anymore. And then if you can rig it up, the belt squat is actually probably the best choice here. That exercise really lends itself to just high reps and hard work. And you can use a heavier weight there because with the belt being situated around the waist, that means that there would actually be zero spinal compression during the movement. And so it should not bother the herniated disc. And I think that is enough for today, guys. If I didn't get to your question today, I'll try to get to it in the next installment. And if you have a question, a training related question that you'd like for me to answer in future installments, then feel free to leave it in the comments here today, and I'll save those questions in a Word document, and I'll try to answer as many of them as I can down the road. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope you found it helpful. And if you'd like to support the production of more free, informative content like this, then feel free to check out my website and pick up one of my training templates. It's www.enkirielitefitness.com. Keep training hard, and I will catch you guys next time.